Okay, we're continuing Halacha Aleph. We're only about Chalav still. We're going to read a whole section more of the Ramah. The Ramah says, "V'shivchas shechalvas habehemos bebeis Yisrael b'dir shalahem." If you have a shivcha, I mean a shiksa, who's milking the animals in the Yid's house, if there's no separation, meaning the Yid is not right there, but the Yid could get to there, and there's nothing in the way, and there's no davar tummy in the area, then mutter you can leave them milking the cows, even though there's no Yid there at all. Since they're in the Yid's house or right in the Yid's neighborhood, and the Yid is right around there, so you don't have to worry about a davar tummy. This is a continuation of of a treif animal. You don't have to worry about it to be a treif animal, and that's a continuation of what the Ramah had said before, and the Machaber said before him that the goal of making something Chalav Yisroel is there should be a mirsus. He doesn't actually have to watch it himself. It just has to be a mirsus. The guy is afraid to mix in treif milk because the Yid might catch him. Okay, that's good enough. So here's another example of that.
Yeah, but here it's going further. It's saying that if it's in a situation where there's not shaykh, that the guy should mix something in. The guy's not going to go on the Yid's farm and bring his own stuff in.
Right. That's exactly where we're headed. Yes, that's exactly where we're headed.
Jewish house, neighborhood.
And based on what happens if the guy's house in between? So Tzarech Liyas Yisrael, then the Yid has to be there. Ki'ilu cholvas b'beis avcham. This is the milking in the guy's house, because now the guy's house is there. In the way, it makes things much more accessible. Okay. Now, then the Ramah says like this: even if the Yid who's watching, in all these kind of cases that we've been talking about, that the Yid has to watch, it's good enough if that Yid who's watching is a child. Okay, it's good enough. Because the guy is afraid of them. Okay. Now, the Ramah says that the guy is afraid of them. The Ramah says that the guy doesn't realize that in Dini Nemanis we don't trust a 9-year-old like we trust a 15-year-old. And even if we don't trust him, he's afraid of being caught anyhow. If he'll report him, he's afraid of being caught. So there's a mirsus created by the child also. I'll mention that although that's what the Ramah says, the Chasam understands that the din is that it's even. Before I say that, before the Chasam. So according to the Ramah, when we say that a child can be the mashgiach, that means only, like the Ramah said earlier, that the guy has to know that the Yidden don't want to eat treif milk. Okay, having mirsus means that I'm afraid of being caught because I know what you're looking for. But if I don't, the Ramah said this earlier, if I don't know that you don't want treif milk, well, I'm not afraid of anything. I don't even understand what I'm not supposed to be doing, so I wouldn't be afraid. Okay, the Chacham argues, and he says that the truth is this din is true even if the guy does not know what you're looking for. And it's not because of mirsus, it's because in this is a case where a katan is neman. Okay, this is an example of a case where a katan is neman. It's not because the guy is afraid of him, like the Ramah says, it's because a Yid is neman. And if you remember way back in when we go to Simon Pei Daled, we talked about which cases would a child be neman to be a mashgiach and not a Yisroel, those kind of rules. And this would have, we had a child on the computer, that's correct. And this case would have qualified. Okay, so what the Chacham is saying is consistent with the way we had understood back then, that this is a case where the child would be neman. I have to say, and the Ramah doesn't say it that way. The Ramah says the guy is afraid of him. Okay, let's continue. What happens if the guy was milking some cows and the Yid hadn't showed up yet? Okay, he started milking at 8 o'clock, the Yid didn't show up till 9 o'clock. The Yid came while they were in the middle. Nowadays, that treif milk is really very rare. It's mutter to use this milk. Okay, but we're not going to talk about this. There's a big to-do in the Achronim. Why this is true, if this is true, which cases it's true. This is negate. If that happens, then the Mashgiach shows up late, it'll be negate in that channel. Okay, we're not going to talk about that, okay? We're not talking about that, okay? Miyu. If the Yid didn't show up till it was over, then it's like a guy who milked it by himself. The asher afbish ain't davar tummy be'edroy. That it's asher, even though there's no davar tummy, the guy milked it without a Yid at all, so it's not good. Okay, so now we're not going to talk about what everyone's talking about here on the page is why is it true in this case and not that case. But what we're going to talk on is the Ramah is describing that nowadays this treif milk is really very rare. Okay, it's really very rare that anybody uses treif milk. It's not, at least where we live, it's not common to have treif milk. In other countries in Africa, in certain countries, in parts of Asia, it is common, but for where we live, it's not common. So we're going to talk about this time, today we're going to talk about a possible heter, sort of based on this, that the Achronim said a couple of hundred years ago, that a person should not have to be makon Chalav Yisroel, That's going to be, and that will be an introduction for Emir Tisha. Next time, we're going to talk about the more modern version of that, which is what we call Chalav Stam, okay, which is a variation on this heter. Okay, so today, we're not going to get to Chalav Stam, but we're going to talk about this heter that was said hundreds of years ago, not based on the Ramah, but relating to this Ramah, this piece of information, which is, there wasn't treif milk around. Okay, what is that? There was a fundamental machlokes, goes back a couple hundred years, the Pri Chadash and the Chasam Sofer. What is that machlokes? The Pri Chadash says that the Mishnah says you have to eat Chalav Yisroel. You can't have milk that was milked by a guy if there wasn't anybody watching. That he'd watching it. The Pri Chadash understands that the Mishnah that says that and many other Yisurim, the Mishnah is telling you, if I could use the word, advice. The Mishnah is telling you there's a chashash that there could be treif milk mixed into it, and therefore the Mishnah is telling you be aware that there could be treif milk mixed into it, and therefore go ahead and use the regular rules of the Torah of how you decide if something is a chashash or not a chashash. Go out and there are all kinds of rules. There's roives and chazakas and all kinds of rules to figure things out. Go figure out whether this is or is not a concern. And therefore, if you realize that the guy has no incentive to put in treif milk. Let's say, for example, if horse's milk costs $1 a gallon and cow's milk costs 50 cents a gallon, so he would have no incentive to mix it in because it would be foolish because he could sell it for more elsewhere. Or now he doesn't have an incentive. Let's say he doesn't have any available. Okay? There's no camels in the whole Iowa. There isn't one camel. So what is he going to do? He couldn't mix in camels because there aren't any camels in the whole Iowa. So then, in either of those cases, the rules of the Torah tell us that the guy wouldn't do it. We're not choshesh he would do it lahachis. He's not trying to get us. He would only do it if it was worthwhile for him. It's not worthwhile to him. It's not worthwhile to him, and therefore you don't have to be choshesh. So when the Mishnah says it, there are other examples in the Mishnah here in Avodah Zarah of things that are only usher if there's a concern. If in your case there's no concern, where you're living there's no concern, you don't have to worry about it. That's a precaution.
Isn't this hard to say? How do you know that's only advice? Is it from the Lashon? Did you going to say he also passed Hashaman in the same Mishnah?
So he says that some of the dinim in the Mishnah are xeris, and some of them are not. Some of them are. The word advice is a little too weak. It's not a little too weak to say. It's Chacham tells you have to be choshesh for that concern. You have to be choshesh for it more than you would be choshesh maybe on your own. You have to be choshesh, but chashash only goes that far. At a certain point, I say, why would anybody be so foolish as to do that? So I know that he didn't do that, and then I can eat it. Okay.
I saw an interesting article on the Rambam. Somebody wrote that every time the Rambam writes Tzivur Chachamim, it's advice.
Really?
He went through like 30 some cases.
Okay.
And you see...
I wouldn't start up with you on that.
Is there one on milk?
Even though
Tzivur Chachamim is advice.
Even the things in Mishnah, like Hashash Chasam,
And Aruch
it's actually from the still finding zero.
Right. Okay. So that's saying that it's a clear. Okay, guys, let's go.
And same thing, the same Mishnah, we're saying for
Yes.
Usher, so it's talking about whether it's talking about whether it's to the Kashrus Chasam, even if Kashrus didn't apply necessarily.
Okay, so then.
It still applies, so same as should apply here also, even though it might.
So what you're saying, the other side is the Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer says the Mishnah is listing of takanas. The things in the Mishnah that says are asur are takanas chachamim. Takanas chachamim applies even if the reason doesn't apply. So even if you're able to prove that in your case there's no chashash that the guy would mix in treif milk, you have nothing to worry about it because of that. Even so, the chachamim mastered it anyhow. Okay, like many of the other cases of the Mishnahs. Okay, many of the other cases of the Mishnahs are cases of things that are asur, no matter what it's asur, and therefore the Chasam Sofer says, even if you have all the reasons in the world to believe that it's not, that they wouldn't use treif milk, it doesn't make a difference, and the milk is awesome. Okay, this machlokes, as you could imagine, was not theoretical. They weren't talking in learning. This wasn't a theoretical question about what you should do. It was very for real. The Pri Chadash said that he, in his place in Amsterdam, he allowed people to eat the milk without even watching it because he said there was no reason to be kosher to mix anything in, and therefore he was legal.
Was it pretty kosher in your shot?
I have no idea. I had no idea. But the Pri Chadash says that he said that maybe he wrote something. I have no idea. I'll ask the other people who know these things. Okay, so now let's go through some of the rayas let's go to some of the rayas to each of the sides. Okay.
Sorry, you said. You're talking about the farm and the separated and not separated.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. talk about them knowing what you're looking for, not knowing what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
You just scanned over there real quick. Is that how much of a concern is that?
That means is when we say that the person is afraid of being caught to do the wrong thing, you can only say he's afraid of being caught when he understands what the rules are. If you work in the kitchen and they wouldn't know that you can't put milk and meat together, he's not afraid of being caught because no one ever told him not to do it. So we only could say he's afraid of being caught if he's been taught the rules, he understands what the rules are. Now the mashgiach in and out might catch him. He's afraid of being caught. But if there's,
but we're not talking about understanding what's going on. We're just
he has to know what the rules are.
Okay.
If he doesn't know what he's supposed, if he doesn't know what he's not supposed to
No,
know,
I mean he doesn't have to know that the Torah says that.
he doesn't have to know
just
the details.
Right.
But he has to know what he's being asked to do, so that then, if you would catch him, you'd say, "Oh, I caught you. You do the wrong thing."
Any kitchen has rules.
Yes.
They're just rules that he has to follow.
Correct. Okay. So now, some of the rights to the pre-Chadash. Pre-Chadash brings some rights. It says like this. The Gemara says, if there's no non-kosher animals in the area where the guy is milking, not the city, if there's no non-kosher animals in the corral where they're in the herd where they're milking, then the Gemara says it's pshita that the yid doesn't have to watch the milking. Okay, so Pri says, wait a second, why is it pshita the yid doesn't have to watch the milking? The Mishnah says you have to watch it. If it was a takana that you have to watch it even if there's no chashash, why shouldn't there be a takana in this case also? You saying there's a takana? You want to say that there's a takana no matter what? So how come if there's no treif animals in the area, why doesn't the yid have to watch it? Okay, what does it help?
Some will say, speaking in a case where there was no hefsek in between, where you could be...
But if it's a takana, the Mishnah says a yid has to watch it. So if the takana is you must watch it, so then why do you have to watch it if there are no treif animals? If that's what the takana is. That's what the takana is. Okay. So the Chasam Sofer says he doesn't even says it's like in passing. Both of his answers you can say it's like in passing, not even like making like it's a question. He paraphrases. If you remember, I told you. I think I told you. Tosfos asks a question. The Mishnah says you have to watch it. I don't remember the words. Yisrael has to be re'ehu. The Gemara says that even if it's sitting outside and he can't see it. Tosfos says, wait a second. The Mishnah says you have to see it. How come it's Taninu lahad the Tanur Rabbanan? It's like a brisa that says you don't have to see it. So Tosfos says what the Mishnah means when it says you have to see it, it means you have to be able to see it. So the Chasam Sofer is learning is the takana is not to see the milking, the takana is to be able to see the milking. So if you're sitting outside, you're sitting further away, but you're able to see it, and people say even if you go to the nichnas, you're able to see it, all those things are considered able to see it.
Video camera.
And video cameras for a few times from now. So if you're able to see it, so all those things are able to, that's good enough, that counts as seeing it. That is a takana. Okay? The other side, the pre-Chadash one thing when Tosfos said you're able to see, Tosfos meant to say is what is the Gemara teaching us? The Gemara is teaching you that you just have to have a raya that they're using kosher milk. What do you mean able to see? What does able to see mean? Able to see means you have to bring some kind of a proof that it's okay. Okay, that's one right. Then pre-Chadash brings that there's a Mordechai who said there's a food called kutach. Okay, kutach is a food that has dairy ingredients in it, and whatever. It's not important to us what's going on with that case, but the thing is that you're allowed to eat it. Okay, you're allowed to eat the kutach. So from a guy, you're allowed to get it. So he says, so wait a second, so why are you allowed to eat the kutach? He says, what happened? There's milk inside of it. Okay, it has dairy ingredients in it. Why isn't it usher? Because of chalav akum. Okay, it's chalav akum. So he says, obviously it must be that the case of the Mordechai is talking in those times that there was no chashash really to mix in treif milk. So it must be the reason you can eat the kutach is because there's no chashash to put in treif milk, so it's mutter. There's the gzera.
The corded type of cheese.
Whatever, it's not important to us. Okay? It's not a cheese. No, it's not a cheese. It contains milk ingredients in it. Okay. It's not important to us what it is. Okay, so so that's what he says. He says, so how come the kutach is mutter if it has these dairy ingredients in it? It must be that there's no takana, and in the times of the Mordechai there was also no chashash that people would eat. Okay, now, the Chasam Sofer says, he brings rayas to answer this, but Chasam Sofer brings rayas that the takana of chalav akum came before the takana of gvinas akum. Okay, we're going to see in the next halacha, as a takana, not only you not eat milk from a guy, but you can't eat cheese made by a guy either. So the Chasam Sofer says that the takana of Chalav Yisroel was first. So the Chasam Sofer says, here's a question. He says, if Chalav Yisroel was made required first, why would they ever make a requirement to have a Gvinas Yisrael. All cheese is made out of milk. So if milk has to be watched by a Yid, I mean, in other words, I guess the presumption is the Yid's going to keep an eye on it afterwards also until it gets to drinking it. So then all cheese is also going to be automatically. What were they adding to when they made this takana called Gvinas Yisrael? Gvinas Yisrael and Chalav Yisroel. What's the difference? You already did it. You already made a Chalav Yisroel. So what would be the point of making an extra takana of Gvinas Yisrael? So he said that proves that the Isser of Chalav Yisroel is only when it's in a form of milk. When it's in the milk, in that form of milk, that's when it's Isser. When it changes form and it became Gvina, the Isser of Chalav Yisroel would fall off. Chol Akum would fall off. It wouldn't be Isser anymore. Therefore, wait a second. Therefore, when it came to the point of cheese, if you buy cheese from a guy, it would be mutter. It wouldn't be Chalav Akum. Cheese from a guy would be mutter. So they had to make another takana called Gvinas Akum. Gvina has a different issue to it. But the Chalav itself, the Chalav switching into Gvina would have lost. It wouldn't be considered Gvinas. They weren't asked why did they ask for cheese. Yeah. No, they didn't ask. But it's already has to be checked because it's Chalav Yisroel. They said why would they? Why did? We're gonna get that. But I'm talking about the Chasam says. This is his. Because why are you saying?
We ask for things that people that are not going to Chalav Yisroel. If some other kind of food, dairy ingredients in it, we don't. Time. To answer, I was going to say this to address what you said. This Chasam Sofer is going to be in the Geitas. We're probably going to do it when we get to Halacha Gimel. Okay, when we talk about butter and milk powder. Okay, that's where the Shai. I think we're going to talk about it. Which is this sounds like he's saying when it's not in the milk form, it becomes mutter. In which case, there are lots of other things, like Yossi is saying, lots of other things that would be mutter. They're not cheese, they don't fall into Gvinas Akum, so then they should be mutter. That's going to be Halacha Gimel, is about that, about whether certain foods don't have it.
Yeah. You already asked about cheese, and it gives reasons outside of the milk part.
Right, that's the point. Right. But that's the point. Why did Gvinas
said the cheese, the milk could be 100% kosher. It's the problem that there was there are a few answers in the Gemara. One is that they're afraid of the snake errors, and one is because they're afraid of, at least for the Rashi, they might have been called Tanei mixed in, and that would be stuck in the Gumos. Right. So even if they were using Chalav Yisroel for the cheese aspect, there were still other.
So you're saying, so your answer is that even though when the milk was made, it was Chalav Yisroel, there would be another reason to have Gvinas Yisroel on top of that.
Right.
But didn't the Yid have to keep his eye on it anyhow? Wasn't he taking care of it because it was Chalav Yisroel? He had to keep an eye on it after it was milked until it got to his house. So if in the way it went to the dairy to become cheese, you have to keep an eye on it.
No, what he's saying is, let's say that you watch the milk. Let's make a situation, Chalav Yisroel. Now he takes the milk over to Johnny, the cheesemaker, and he says, I have some Chalav Yisroel, make some cheese. So what's wrong with that? Just kosher cheese, kosher milk. What's a shaila? There's other kshashim that the guy is now going to mess up the Chalav Yisroel that they had to be moist.
Doesn't the Yid have to keep an eye on it anyhow?
No, once it's Chalav Yisroel, you have to keep an eye on it. The name was not.
Why not? Why would he switch it anyhow?
There's got to be
the same. Okay.
Over there. Anything else? Why not? If the Jews watching anyway, why do we have a chashash of the nickname? So he says that in Achanami it depends on the situation. Remember, where the cases where there was no chashash.
Okay. So I'll move the places. I'm not sure. Okay. So the I have to just tell you, we're going to talk more about this when we get to Mitzvah Halacha Gimel. We'll get to his Taisus also when we get to Halacha Gimel. But I have to tell you, the Chasam Sofer is working with an assumption, something that we're going to talk about in Halacha Beis. The big machlokes in Halacha Beis, which is, what does it take to make something into Gvinas Yisrael? What's required to make milk that made into cheese, make it Gvinas Yisrael? Well, the Chasam Sofer seems to be going like what the Ramah says. The way you make Gvinas Yisrael is by having a Yid watch it. A Yid watches the milking. So the Chalav Yisroel is made by Yid watching it. Gvinas Yisrael made by Yid watching it. So what's the same? It's the same Gzera. What's the difference? You just have to watch it a little longer. It's the same thing. We're going to find out there that the Shach holds that the way you make Gvinas Yisrael is by a Yid owning it. So then that requirement is very different than Chalav Yisroel. Chalav Yisroel, Yid had to watch it. But when it came to becoming Gvinas Yisrael, Yid watching it wouldn't be good enough. To make it Gvinas Yisrael, there was now an extra requirement, that Gvina has this extra requirement that you have to own it. Okay, so it's not, it implies, you could get around this, but it implies, basically like the Ramah said, that the Chiyav of Gvinas Yisrael is to watch it just like Chalav Yisrael, in which case, they're both the same thing and he has a fair question. Okay. Before we move to the riots of the other side, I'll tell you that these riots of the Chadash, to prove that it's not Gzera, these riots that it's not Gzera, even the people who hold that Chasam Sofer may
accept these rayas to a certain extent. Okay, immersion that'll be for next time. We're going to talk about it. They might accept these rayas. The rayas might prove something, even if it doesn't prove all the way. Okay, what's the rayas to the Chasam Sofer? So one of the rayas is that the Gemara says that the guy had no treif animals in his area, in his corral, in his herd. He had no treif animals, and the Yid was sitting outside, and it's still kosher. Even though the Yid can't see it, it's kosher anyhow. So the Radvan says, well, why did it have to say that the Yid was sitting outside? What is he sitting outside for? If there's no treif animals around, why does he have to be there at all? That sure sounds like, even if there's nothing treif around, you have to be there anyhow. Even if there's nothing treif, you still have to do something. You don't have to actually eyeball the milking, but you have to be doing something. If not, why didn't it say the guy was there altogether? Why do we have to say the guy was there? Why don't we just say nothing? If there's no treif animal, you take it.
There's no treif, it's good.
Correct. So the Radvaz himself says the answer to that question is, in the times of the Gemara, there was a chashash of gilui. You couldn't leave things uncovered. Liquids couldn't be left uncovered, and that's why they had to watch it. Nowadays, we're not chashash for gilui anyhow. So the Gemara had it for a detail. The Gemara was talking about it for a detail. We had not negate. Okay. The Prichader says the Gemara didn't mean anything when it said the case. The Gemara meant that the guy going to buy a bucket of milk, and he's going to be sitting outside while they milk it. He's going to walk in and say, Johnny, I need 2 buckets of milk. So he's going to sit outside while they're milking the cow. It doesn't mean anything, the case. It wasn't of any significance that the guy's outside. It means that he could even be outside. But if he would go in, he would just pick it up and the delivery was ready, he could just walk out also. He didn't have to be there. The outside was just a practical thing that he would sit outside. Okay, and the simpler answer, some place can mention this, the simpler answer is that the reason why the Yid has to sit outside is because all the Mishnah said was, the Brisa said was, that there are no treif animals in the guy's herd. That doesn't mean that 50 feet away there aren't treif animals. It's not the Prichadish's case. Prichadish's case is there's no treif animals in the whole city. But there might be treif animals 50 feet away. So if I don't sit outside, I'm not going to know that he doesn't bring in a treif animal from the next farm. Just because his farm doesn't have treif animals, how do I know he didn't bring one from next door? So I'm sitting outside, so I can just keep an overall eye on the whole situation that a treif animal doesn't get mixed in. Does get brought in. If I would be sitting at home, I wouldn't know there could be treif animals in someplace else. Different than the Prichadash. Prichadash's case is that there's no treif animals b'chlal in the city. Okay, one last raya is, the Ramah says, if a guy milked cows with the intention of turning that milk into cheese, and he actually made the cheese into it, then b'diavad, you could use, you could eat it. Okay? I'm not talking about the convenience part of it. B'diavad, you could use it and assume that the milk must have been cow's milk. Because we know, or we saw in the Gemara, that only kosher milk turns into cheese. So if the guy is making cheese, he must have used, if he planned to make cheese out of this milk, he must have used cow's milk. He wouldn't mix in other milk because it won't turn into cheese. So we can figure out that he only put in kosher milk into this thing. So the Chasam Sofer says, he says, wait a second. He says, we know that the guy's only using kosher milk. How do we know? Because he's planning on making cheese. Right? That sure sounds like what the Chadash would have been accepted. That's good raya that the guy's only using kosher, that he's only kosher milk. But the Ramah doesn't say it's mutter. Ramah says it's mutter b'diavad. Doesn't say it's mutter. So why is it only mutter b'diavad? That sounds like it's mutter b'diavad because l'chatchila you really have to have a person watching it. You really have to have somebody watching. Birurim don't help you. Right. Okay.
Why is mutter b'diavad?
That's a good question. You say the other way. So b'diavad, why talk? Okay, I'm not sure. Okay. So now, to really understand the Prichadash said 2 reasons, 2 situations when you could be mekel. First was, it's not financially worthwhile for the guy to put in treif milk. Okay, the treif milk is more expensive, so he would rather sell the treif milk by itself, and we never mix it into the kosher milk. That was one thing. The other thing he said, which is the part that's become more famous, the other part that he said was, if there's ein davar tameh be'edroi, ain't davar tameh be'ir, the whole city has no treif animals in it, then it's also, you have no chashash because there's no treif milk around the b'chal.
Treif milking animals or treif?
So that goes to the question. That's the question. What does it mean that a city? How do you make it that a city has no treif animal? What does it take to qualify? Like David said, right? There are squirrels. I don't know if squirrels can be. I guess they can be. Okay, so what does it take for a city to qualify for this thing? So I'm going to tell you 2 opposite extremes. Okay.
What would be the treif animals, like camels? What else?
Cats, dogs, horses, camels, any animal that you can milk. any female mammal you could milk. Okay, so that's why we call it mammals, right? Because they milk, they're young.
Whale.
Okay, a whale. There we go. Yeah. Okay, so okay, so the base
It's not a whale.
I know.
Okay, so the
It's a mammal too, probably.
so the base mayor says he says it's not negaya. This whole machlok is the Pri Chadash and the Chasam Sofer is not negaya. He says it's not negaya. He said this is the base mayor. He says did you ever walk into a city and there were no horses? Like they told me in Stucky, that was the cars. Like, you know what I mean? There were horses in every town. He said, whoever heard of a city that ain't over time the ear? No horse in the whole town? Like, whoever heard of such a thing? You know what I mean? He said,
Horse town, they're both males.
Okay.
Do people milk horses?
Yes, sure. Yes, they do.
Is there controversy with the meat now?
Yes, they milk horses. Yes. So
Yeah,
horses
and
actually
they're using horse meat.
they don't milk pigs.
Wait a minute,
Horses.
in America, sorry.
So the
Isn't the mitzias of like horse milk and cow milk that like if you want to make cheese it's not going to work because the
correct.
so making cheese.
No, we're talking about for milking, just for drinking the milk straight.
Fresh milk.
Just to mix it. So the Pri Chadash says, the best man says, this whole machlokes is moot. It doesn't mean anything because the Pirush on Shulchan. He says the whole thing is moot. Who cares? He says there's no such thing as a city that doesn't have treif animals in it. Okay. Now the if I make you feel more home, the Minchas Loser says the same question. Okay. So he says now he's forgetting. He's ignoring that the Pri Chadash didn't only say that it's mutter if there's ein davar tamei be'ir. The Pri Chadash also said it's mutter if there's no incentive for the person to do it. Okay, so his only case wasn't where there's no davar tamei be'ir. Okay, so he's a little bit he's ignoring that part when he says the whole machlok is not negaya. But his point is that such a thing that there should be no animal you can milk is ridiculous. There's no such thing. Whoever heard of a city that doesn't have an animal you can milk. So the whole thing is moot. That's one extreme. Okay, so what's the answer? Well, how are we going to respond to that? Are there not horses?
Didn't the Chasam Sofer didn't know that, and the Pri Chadash didn't know that?
Pri Chadash.
Pri Chadash didn't know that.
So the Chasam Sofer says, the Chasam Sofer, who's the one who argues on the Pri Chadash, when he explains Pri Chadash, he says that what it means is there have to be no milkable animals in the city. He doesn't mean females. He means just animals that the people consider reasonable to milk. He says if there are animals that nobody would milk, okay, a cat, okay, and where we live, there are people who milk cats actually, but where we live, nobody would dream of milking a cat, okay? Nobody would dream of milking a cat. It's not even within the range. When people look outside, they say, "What can I drink for breakfast?" It doesn't occur to them that they can milk their cat. Okay? In our society, it doesn't even occur to us that we can milk a cat. Maybe when we look at horses, we also don't think about that. Okay, so when the Pri Chadash said there was no davar tamei, what the Chasam Sofer is understanding is, it means the people didn't view any of those animals as milkable except for the cows and the sheep and the goats and the water buffalo. They had these animals that they would consider milkable. The other ones, it didn't even occur to them. It was like it wasn't within reason. That wasn't within the ballpark of being milkable, and that is what it means to have no davar tamei in the ear. That's what we need to do.
Medrash, a side point.
Okay.
Chaim Bamovitz had a lashon.
Okay.
The famous story of the guy, but the king who got sick, and they said he needed milk from a kalba.
Yes.
So they bought dog's milk.
Right. Okay.
So
there's such thing. Yes.
What about chamar? What about the donkey?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Because it's interesting here in the Rav Haz, he says, example, Correct.
That means. Right. In other words, what about other pigs and cats? But nobody milks it. So that's the answer. That it's within the. Okay. So we're going to see in Mitzvah next time when we talk about Chol Stam how this plays into this. Okay. This definition that we just gave, that to say that there's no davar tamei be'ir means there's no milkable or nothing that people consider milkable is going to be in the game when we talk about Chol Stam. It's going to have a very interesting application. Okay. I have to just, before we go on, I'll mention to you that the Tzemach Tzedek says that you should just know, he says, you made this hashara that nobody would use, they don't consider these animals milkable, you don't consider that there's any treif animals around. He says, what happens if the guy has an order to fill? If somebody ordered 20 gallons of milk, and his cow only gave him 18 gallons today. Okay? But in desperation, the guy will milk anything. Okay, in desperation, you never know what he's going to do.
Just add water.
Okay, but he says you never know. So he says he cautioned. He has lots of other reasons, but he cautions, how could you rely on the fact that the guy has no reason to put in treif milk, or he considers none of the animals around are milkable? If the guy is short, he's going to do something. He's going to have to do different
taste.
So if the difference is small enough, so maybe 18 out of 20 is not enough. Maybe 19 and a half. He's short half a yard, but throw it. It's an amount that he can work with. So the guy's going. You never know what could cause a person to do that. So he's a little bit apprehensive about it. In other words, it's a little bit along the lines of the Beis Meir, which is to qualify, you'd have to have absolutely nothing traced in the whole city, which is ridiculous. That's not going to be. So some of the is being a little cautious and says. What the Chadash meant was that there's nothing around that people consider available to milk. But he says, be a little cautious because it's really, you have to be afraid that a guy will be stuck with him.
That Chashash exists.
That it exists. So he argues on the Chadash for other reasons. Next time. Okay. Now, I'm not finished yet. Wait a second. Okay. Now, when I said to you from the Chasam Sofer that there's no animals available for milking, really goes one step further. And that is as follows. At the end of the Tshuva, the Chasam Sofer says something. Many people have heard this. Outside the context that he says it. The Chasam Sofer is like this. He says, I'm arguing on the Pre-Chadash. And you might think that the Pre-Chadash is right. Maybe you think that indeed the Pre-Chadash is right. He says, but L'maisa, the minig is to be makbet to eat Chalav Yisroel. Okay? He said, and since the minig is to eat Chalav Yisroel, so even if in din the Pre-Chadash would be right, the Havana of the Mishnah, the minig Yisroel has become to eat only Chalav Yisroel. And Memela, now it's not asur midrabanan to eat cholav, it's asur midaraisa to eat cholav, because he says famously, a minig is a din deraisa that you have to follow a minig, and therefore now it's asur midaraisa to eat cholav. It used to be only asur midrabanan. Once we came up with the pre-chadash, now in din maybe he's right that you don't have to eat cholav, but everyone kept eating it and kept eating chalav yisroel. It must be that now it's a minig to eat chalav yisroel, and that minig is stronger. It's a deraisa. Okay, it's a somewhat famous line. Wow. That now that it's a minute, it became even more common. So think about what he's saying. Just think about what he's saying, not for the minute part of it. Think about what he's saying. Same true. Where did he come up? Where did he come up with the minig that people don't follow? How did he know that was the minig? So I'm going to answer my question. Stop. Let me say what I'm saying. The minig means is he looked around and he said, in every city that I see, there's no davar tummy be'ir. I see no treif animals. And everyone's still eating chalav yisroel. Where I live, everyone's eating chalav yisroel. It must be that they have a minute to eat chalav yisroel even if there's no treif animals. So this thing that we said, that in davar tummy be'ir means that there's no milkable animals around, he's taking that, in a way, lakula. He's saying, I'm saying that that's what's considered in davar tummy be'ir. So all of my cities qualify, and if everybody qualifies, why are they all eating chalav yisroel? Oh, it must be we have a minute to be machmir. Okay, that's the extreme opposite of the Beis Meir. The Beis Meir says it never applies. There's not a city in the world that qualifies this. And he says that every city, or almost every city, does qualify to the point that I can tell you that there's a minute to be machmir. So this Chasam Sofer is way opposite extreme of the Beis Meir. Okay? So it's just a contrast of what's going on over here. What it qualifies, the Beis Meir says, takes it very literally. Ein davar tummy be'ir means ein davar tummy be'ir. There's no place in the world that qualifies. I don't know, maybe someplace in a desert, someplace, and therefore you're stuck.
But it's going on.
Go ahead.
It's a stretch to read into his words that the minig yisroel Torah, the minig yisroel, is only because there's no other considerable factors, and only because of a minig. Like certain minhagim that stand on their own. They don't have any basis.
Okay. So you're saying
it's a stretch to put that in his words.
So you want to say is that it's not really a minute. Really
no. That he's saying that this, without consideration of all these dinim, the minig still overrides. Of course, there's factors of that you have to be choshesh for things be'er. Of course, you have all these other factors are there. He makes the argument for the Chalav Yisroel. He's saying, in addition to all that, there also became an established minig. That now, like we're walking around without the yarmulke. We don't say no halacha. The point because we get a minig, you're about das Yisrael, because that's the way you conduct yourself.
But how do you know it's a minig? Maybe we're just doing the din rabbanon. The Mishnah says.
No, he's saying the Metziah says that Yidden have accepted upon themselves eating Chalav Yisrael, and they send.
That's more harm than the din rabbanon. Right? You say they're not doing the rabbanon; they're doing something else. They're not doing something else. They're doing what the Chacham said. They're not doing. You're saying they're doing something else. We're not doing something else. We're doing what the Chacham said. The Chacham said only eat Chalav Yisroel. The Chasam are saying we're doing more than what the Chacham said.
But you want to bring a line that because he's hanging this thing on the minute, that means all the other factors aren't there.
No, I'm not saying they're not there. I'm saying is that he's so confident that every city would qualify for being not having a davar tamei that he could call this a minhag. You can only say that's a minhag if you say all my cities would qualify for what the Pri Chadash said.
Okay.
So okay, now one last I don't know.
Milk at this point.
What's your other choice? What's your other choice?
Any other dairy products? When the Chasam Sofer says Minig Yisrael Dinu, it only applies to milk.
No,
at this point.
I don't think anything dairy. Okay, one last point. The Beis Meir makes another point to argue in Pri Chadash. He says, the whole Pri Chadash who said that it's worthwhile, the person would never mix in treif milk because it's not worth it. Okay, because it's not worth it. He says that only applies when you live in a location where there's a market for kosher milk and treif milk. Let's say you live in Saudi Arabia. Okay, they sell cow's milk and they sell camel's milk. So nobody would put his camel's milk into the cow's milk because camel's milk sells for more. You get a better price for your camel's milk, so you wouldn't mix it in. He says, what happens if you live in Chicago? Okay, when you live in Chicago, there is no market for camel's milk. Okay? There's no market for horse's milk. So what will the person do with his horse's milk? He has a horse. Okay, so the horse is, we could use the word, a cash cow. Okay, that's a funny word. It's a cash cow. It's the horse got milk. What am I going to do with the milk? I could squeeze milk out of it, and it's money. Well, nobody wants to buy horse's milk. So what will I do with my horse's milk? If I had a person to sell it to, I would sell it to him. I'll make more money by selling it to him. But if I have no one to sell it to, what am I going to do with it? I'm going to mix it in with my cow's milk. Why am I going to mix it in? Because it maybe in theory it's worth more than the cow's milk is, but Lamaisa no one wants to buy it. So it's garbage. Why would I throw it in the garbage if I could throw it into the milk? Now, this idea that the Beis Meir is saying doesn't really apply in the United States. In the United States, everyone milks their cows, to my knowledge. Everyone milks their cows mechanically. Okay, they attach the machines onto the cows, and they milk the cows mechanically. Machines for milking other animals don't really exist in the United States. So in the person in the United States, he doesn't look at his horse as available for milking, because it's not set up for that. But if I go to Bangladesh, okay, I go to Saudi Arabia, everything's going to be milked by hand anyhow. So there, the horse and the camel are just as milkable as the cow is. In other words, it's not as any far-fetched over here. So what the Beis Meir is saying has a point, which is the guy's got a camel. Camels make loads of milk. Okay, so he has a camel there. Why wouldn't he throw the milk in? He has nothing else to do with it anyhow. So he might as well throw it in. So that's just another argument when we say there's no davar tamei be'ir, is that if there's a davar tamei, even if it's not milkable, if there's nobody who would buy it, in a way it makes it worse.